Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as we get to the end of a year of very much two halves for Labour, I'd like to discuss what we can expect to see the new government deliver in 2025. I've discussed how it, may well take 2 or even 3 years for most of the public to see noticeable improvement, but it won't all come out at once like a cork escaping a bottle of champagne. So what do we have our eyes on for 2025? But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So just going to point out I'm on today's Sunday roast, link in the description below, if I remember to put it in this time. We'll also say that I'll be doing a 7 p.m. stream on New Year's Eve where we can talk more about what's happened in 2024, what we can expect in 2025. But I want to begin that process by looking now at what the big government-driven changes in 2025 will be. Because it's tempting to think, look, Labour are going to begin 2025 in pretty bad shape. Their polling is awful. A new MRP poll says, oh, you're going to lose loads of seats, absolutely lose your majority. In fact, if you look at the results, it will be impossible for any credible coalition government to command a majority. If you had a general election that produced those results, the calls for proportional representation would be deafening because the fragmentation of politics would be a right old mess. Literally, you could not get any coalition to form a majority. However, I don't know why anyone would run an MRP poll a few months after a general election. I have no idea why anyone decided it was a good idea. What I do know is there is no good reason. Like running surveys of what the public think about certain policies or politicians, that has its uses. Voting intention polls, they're, relatively cheap and cheerful. Sure, do those. But a general election prediction, and an MRP poll does nothing other than predict what would happen if there were a general election tomorrow. You do that several years out from an election, utterly useless, has no practical benefit. Despite the fact that Labour have, in my opinion, recklessly sacrificed some goodwill with a small number of policies that came with a high political cost but no obvious economic benefit, they do actually begin 2025 in pretty good place. No, I haven't gone mad. First of all, they're in power. If their polling was this bad in opposition, you're in trouble. But in government, you've got agency to deliver and therefore convince the public. Second of all, although the issue of competence is still to be proven, what Labour have already put in place is going to yield some obvious benefits. The significant increase in taxes, which despite the Tories claim, Labour said they wouldn't put up taxes. No, Labour had tax rises throughout their manifesto. In fact, the first page of policies, I keep saying, included 3 tax rises, but tax rises on richer people. And of course, the higher than expected borrowing. That is being used to invest in public services. That is extra money going into public services, which is exactly what the public wanted and still do want. Labour's current, if you look at their unpopularity at the moment, you go, well, yes, partly that is down to their own political naivety and poor communications. They have to accept responsibility for that. But it's also partly down to a savage beat in the Tory media. All that fuss about expenses and donations and gifts, and this comes with the territory, of course. And if Labour don't press ahead with media reform, then they've got no right to complain about it either. But it is a factor. If the media were talking more about, for example, the investment in public services and other spending designed to raise the standard of living, then the public attitudes towards the government would be fundamentally different, better, even though they would still take that hit from some of those sillier policies. Also, there's a sense these days that the electorate are very impatient. People seem to expect a new government to turn things around immediately. However, I don't think this impatience is a particularly serious problem because the next election will be in 2028 at the earliest. Past voting behaviour consistently tells us that people will judge at the election itself. Now, there may be a fallout at local elections, but unfortunately, you feel bad for those people who currently have those council seats and may not have them in a year or two time. But unfortunately, it's one of those yins and yangs of politics. When your party is in government, which is generally agreed to be a good thing if you're a member of that party, you're going to take a hit in local elections. But at the end of the day, if at the next general election, which is the grand prize. If people feel they are better off, they're going to vote for more of the same. And what Labour are putting in place is going to improve both public services and people's incomes, which we know from recent elections around the world is crucial. But in the short term, what can we expect in 2025? Well, the budget's now been set. Yes, Reeves, of course, can still tweak it, and I suppose will do over time. She can certainly still tweak it even before the main thing's implemented next spring. But the tax and spend plans for the rest of the Parliament are basically announced now. So the main focus next year will be on legislation. That's the other thing the government can do. They've set budgets, they can legislate. And the legislation announced with their first King's Speech, the government have been saying they might actually be legislating for 16 and 17-year-olds to have the vote as early as next year. Now, that suggests that they intend to complete their King's Speech legislation in that next year. So what should we look out for? Well, I would say the most important is the Employment Rights Bill. It's going to ban certain employment practices. It's going to give more job security, better protect and boost access to sick pay, an expansion of flexible working, improving the enforcement of workers' rights, because, a law is not a law if it's not properly enforced. And a host of other changes to the employment framework. There are still details to be finalised as the legislation passes through Parliament. It's currently in the committee stage at the House of Commons bit. So, there's a long way to go yet. Both business leaders and union leaders are a bit, can we get some changes in our favour? Or defend the current wording, right? But at the end of the process, once it passes into law, which is going to be next year, there will be certain things that you'll have to give an implementation period for, but it will not only improve the conditions of millions of workers, and remember, the largest employers are going to move most quickly to put the changes in place. They may even put some changes in place before the legislation's passed just to get ready. But it's going to lead to a stronger hand for workers and unions to make sure pay is driven upwards as well. Getting this legislation out of the way in the first year means that there is enough time for the effects to become obvious to a lot of people before the election. And the boost to flexible working, that should be getting a lot of attention. Because, a major problem that the Conservatives in government cited, and Labour have also cited, what is it in terms of our labour force? It's, there's this massive number of people that exited the labour market since COVID. Well, for some of those people, it was due to illness, but not all of them. And what's the best way of getting a whole group of people that are currently not working into work? Flexible working. It's like the single most important thing you can do to address a problem with not enough people in the workforce. Another important piece of legislation being passed next year is the Renters' Rights Bill, abolishing no-fault evictions, giving renters more rights, such as the right to request having a pet, improving mandatory standards for rented accommodation, setting clear time limits for landlords to get work done, particularly for hazardous problems. This legislation will make renters more secure and reduce the risk of homelessness. And on the subject of accommodation, there's the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. This is a big one. This is a huge one for Labour in delivering, amongst other things, more homes, including affordable homes. It also covers the energy infrastructure needed as well. But when you think about the improvements that people will need to see in order to believe Labour are delivering at the next general election, incomes, better access to housing are, two of the top ones, aren't they? Along with better access to the NHS. But I have no doubt that NHS waiting lists are going to come tumbling down, like they would under a Labour government, right? The biggest challenges are on pay, energy and housing. These are the areas where the government need more than just policies. Like for the NHS, they just need to get their policies broadly right. For the other ones, there are other factors at play as well. So it's possible on those other issues to run into brick walls where success is not guaranteed. But the legislation needed to deliver those plans is all being passed in 2025. We won't be able to see much happening until those laws are passed. As I say, you may get some employers looking at the Employment Rights Bill going, well, let's get our systems up to date, ready for this, so that we don't have to rush it at the last minute. So you may see some improvements, but by and large, you need to wait for the laws to be passed and implemented before we see major changes. But once they are, From that point on, right up until the next election, we're going to be seeing those improvements. Also, it's worth noting, despite all the doom and gloom about the state of the economy, I mean, this is driven by the Tory media. And there are very real risks in the early part of 2025. At the moment, it's not good. But what Reeves has put in place in the budget, according to various independent economists, is going to help the economy. I mean, how can it not? It's more spending. The government have put tens of billions of pounds, or are putting over the next parliament, tens of billions of pounds more public investment into the system. How can that not improve things? Sure, nobody believes the economy is going to take off like a rocket. Labour insists they are pushing some growth drivers that aren't yet included in the economic models, but those features, you know, they're not going to appear for a couple of years. But assuming Reeves and Starmer can shelter us from a few, you know, predictable storms coming from Russia, China, the Middle East and the United States over the next few years, then economic growth is absolutely going to come. And because Labour's moves are going to better link economic growth with people's living standards, people are going to feel it. So despite the narrative in the media and obviously the current state of polling, what Labour are already putting in place and will be putting in place in 2025 is going to improve things. The people aren't taking that into account in their thinking yet because they're not aware it's happening. The media aren't bothering to point it out to them. How many voters really follow the passage of legislation through Parliament or even read the budget? If you ask the average person who votes but doesn't follow politics carefully, say to them, what are the major laws that Labour are currently passing at the moment? What are the major bits of legislation going through Parliament? I'm going to bet a lot of them are going, I'm not sure, I don't know. But these changes are coming. And once the legislation is passed, more and more people will feel the positive effects over the next few years. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for listening. And until next time, I'll see you later.